Welcome to Cultivating Our Kids, a podcast dedicated to empowering parents with the tools, insights, and resources they need to guide their children toward thriving futures. We're here to help you grow confident, capable learners. Join us as we explore the latest in education trends and career opportunities to cultivate a passion for lifelong learning in your children. Let's build the next generation of innovators, problem solvers, and leaders, one episode at a time.
Today on the Cultivating Our Kids podcast, we pose the question, how do we cultivate in our kids a sense of adventure? We'll talk today to our guest, Dan Ellis, an old friend of mine who has led quite a life of adventure, and we'll hear specifically about a very unique experience he's had living and working in Antarctica. First, we'll hear from today's sponsor, which is STEM Tree of North Dallas. At STEM Tree, we offer after-school programs as well as camps when schools are closed. Kids in kindergarten through 8th grade learn robotics, coding, science, and engineering so that they begin to foster an interest and ability across multiple disciplines. Check us out on Instagram at STEM Tree of North Dallas to see the types of things we do. Hi, Dan, and welcome to the Cultivating Our Kids podcast. It's great to see you.
Hey, Allison, good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
So first, you heard the question of the day for our podcast, but I want to peel back a little bit and hear from you. Why is it important to cultivate a sense of adventure in kids today?
I mean, for me, I think it's important to have a sense of adventure, realistically, just to push oneself out of their comfort zone. You know, if you're going to new places or trying new things, is usually when your brain is working on overdrive and you're trying to figure a lot of things out. And a lot of times you don't necessarily succeed in that first attempt at whatever you're trying to do, but getting out of that comfort zone and kind of learning how to take in the new information and turn it into a process that works for yourself, I think is a skill that is really helpful in many facets of life.
Absolutely. And tell us a little bit about, so I teased in the opening that you have lived and worked in Antarctica, and that's what I'd like you to tell our listeners about today. But I know that doesn't just come upon you all of a sudden. So tell us a little bit about how this opportunity even came upon you, and how did this become a reality for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely not necessarily a quick jump just right to Antarctica by any means. So, fortunately in my kind of post-high school, post-collegiate life as a young adult, was really just kind of exploring what I enjoyed to do, lots of different places and spaces for the most part. Got onto the travel bug and was spending some time in other parts of the world, lots of different continents. And in those travels, specifically in New Zealand, kind of heard about the opportunity to be able to go to Antarctica through people that were traveling through New Zealand, going back and forth to that continent, and started to get a lot of information from them and looked into it, and it was a lot easier than I anticipated, which was surprising.
And tell us about New Zealand. So you were there on a work visa. So explain a little bit about that. And I know you also are a photographer and you were taking photographs as well. So tell us just a little bit about how some of these different passions and opportunities came together.
Sure, yeah. As life so often is, things are very intertwined. So as Allison alluded to, I was down in New Zealand on what they call a working holiday visa. And this is something that I wish I had learned more about kind of earlier in life, because they are somewhat on a time restraint for young adults, most likely. Usually they're aimed at people coming just out of college, so for people between the ages of 18 and 25 and sometimes 30. But as a U.S. citizen, we have access to working holiday visas in 6 countries, being New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Ireland, Singapore, and South Korea. And they are very easy to apply for. You don't need to have a lot of money in the bank. Like I said, they really are aimed at basically people going to explore other places of the country and getting a little bit of work experience while they're there. So very much encouraging the getting out of your comfort zone, seeing a new place, learning new information, kind of taking all of those skills and kind of wrapping them into one. So I didn't find out about them until I was almost out of the age group. So when I found out, I jumped on it, went to New Zealand, and then started finding out about Antarctica and decided to continue the travel and new experiences life for a little bit.
And so tell us about Antarctica. How long were you there and what exactly were you doing there?
Yeah, absolutely. Did lots of different things there. You wear a lot of different hats in Antarctica. I was there for 13 months and 1 day, which I know is
Wow.
very specific. But time is a very interesting thing, especially on a continent where the sun is up for 6 months and then down for 6 months. So that 1 day, I was ready to leave for sure. So it really sticks in my mind. What I was doing down there, I had the title of steward coordinator, which is kind of a holdover from when it was mostly military. And kind of a loose definition is like management of like non-science inventory. So anything that the station needed supplies wise, food, towels, light bulbs, chairs, desks, all that kind of stuff was kind of under my purview, as well as running the very small general store and post office that we have down there, as a matter of fact, to send things back and forth.
So we have some photographs that you took while in Antarctica. We'll throw those up and have you just narrate a little bit. Tell us what we're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the South Pole Telescope. In winter, obviously, the sun is down with the Aurora Australis and the Milky Way. Really, just obviously very pretty scene, but the South Pole Telescope, very kind of imposing building, which is a little bit off the main campus, I guess you could call it. Just really enjoyed going out there because it's like, this is the science. It's like they're looking into deep space to find out answers to all kinds of stuff. While I was down there, they were actually looking for a specific gravitational wave pattern to like definitively prove that the Big Bang happened, which was really
Wow.
exciting. Same thing. So this is the South Pole Telescope again, just lit up in a different fashion, but yeah, it would rotate all the way around the sky. This is one of the areas we would go to for recreation, as a matter of fact. This is, just the sea ice, and the sea ice would meet the continental ice shelf of Antarctica and obviously form these pressure ridges. And is one of the areas that we could go hike as recreation. So you could go walk around on the sea ice and kind of just get outside, have some fun time away from work. That is the actual South Pole, surrounded by all the flags that are in the Antarctic Treaty, and then that is the South Pole Station in the background. So that is basically where we lived, worked, studied, everything all in that one building. Again, during the winter with some auroras going on above it. Me and one of my good friends that I made while down there, again, that's the geographic South Pole, the pole you can see there. Have a fun memory with our Colorado state flag and at the South Pole. So this is the inside of that telescope we were looking at. So that's the inside of the South Pole Telescope. Again, it was on bearings and plates that I could rotate 360 degrees, tracking anything in the sky. Just obviously lots of sensors and engineering things going on there. We were fortunate to be able to get tours from the grantees that were down there working the projects, which was really nice. This is the ice tunnels underneath the station. Again, a very kind of extremely unique to Antarctica situation. So the two pipes along the side you see are essentially how we would get our water for the station. So again, extremely remote. There's no plumbing. The only way to get water is to melt the ice. So one of those pipes would be bringing down boiling water and kind of melting out a big bubble underneath the station, and the other one importing clean drinking water, which is 10,000-year-old ice, which is relatively interesting. And then this is just kind of a day in the life. The other photographs I had made it look pretty glamorous, but 99% of the time, this is what it looked like: gray, windy, cold, and yeah, going about your day, walking out to an outbuilding to get supplies and bring them inside. And then again, as the sun was starting to come back up, it's the South Pole with the telescope kind of off in the distance, and kind of just showing the expanse of ice that you're on at the South Pole. I mean, you're very far away from anything remotely close to resembling normal life. These are the military planes and how you get to and from the continent. It's a C-17. Pretty unique experience. They're not heated inside. They're not sound protected. It is a jumble of equipment and people, and it's a very long flight even from New Zealand to Antarctica. It's about 11 hours, and that just gets you to the coast, and then it's another 6.5 to the South Pole.
Those are amazing pictures. Thank you for sharing. And I am almost positive to say that nobody listening to this podcast has been to Antarctica or down there to the South Pole. So, what an amazing experience you had. Something interesting, I think, a connection that I'm hearing from our last guest, our last interviewee works at a solar observatory, solar telescope, and he is a solar astronomer. But he said, I'm a scientist, but there are lots of non-scientists who work there. There's educators, researchers. It takes a whole team working together to accomplish what we have to do. And you mentioned that as well. Tell us a little bit about, from your knowledge, what were the scientists doing down there and what were just the other parts of the team that made this all possible?
Yeah, absolutely. So very interesting, that connection, because a lot of people from the South Pole or from Antarctica that are working on telescopes, they will kind of bounce around to other telescopes and have different contracts, so that it's kind of a small community, if you will. But yeah, absolutely. So the South Pole has a few different experiments going on at each time. They operate in 2-year grantee cycles. So, realistically, any college can apply to have a grant and get time, either using one of the telescopes or the NOAA atmospheric machinery, or there's also an electron microscope looking for particles coming from deep space, all kinds of fun stuff. So while I was there, the three main experiments going on were, one, as I touched on, the South Pole telescope was looking into deep space to find a gravitational wave pattern that is essentially really compressed. The theory being that if the Big Bang happened, it would be such an explosive force that it would be strong enough to actually compress gravitational wavelengths into a very short form. So they were looking for that really tight squiggle, essentially, to be able to be like, hey, this happened and this is when it happened, which is really, really cool.
Wow.
They did actually think that they found it a few times, once while I was down there and a few times since, but as technology gets better, they're like, oh, it was just dust in space or dust on our camera lens or all kinds of fun stuff. So there's always people trying to disprove the science, which is fun. The other experiment that was going on with the electrons, they're actually called neutrons. So there's a neutron detector, and essentially what a neutron is a particle in space that's not really affected by gravity, which is pretty interesting. So what that allows us to find out is that as these particles travel through space and they hit our sensors, we can track them in a relatively straight line back to where they came from and be like, hey, this part of space has carbon or has other elements that we have similar to here. And we can kind of start to about that are very, very far away that could potentially be similar to the area where we are, which is fantastic. And then NOAA is there as well, doing all kinds of atmospheric research. Again, unfortunately, because that's where the ozone hole forms, so it's a very clear look into deep space, but because of that also allows NOAA to sense lots of things that can kind of help predict weather patterns on our planet going into the future.
Well, when I reached out to you about this, you were quick to say, well, I'm not a scientist. I just was working down there, but you could have fooled me. That's really cool, that all those experiments they're doing, and how cool to be down there and be near it and hearing about all of that. One question I have, hearing you say that you were down there for 13 months and a day, what time zone is Antarctica on, or how do you even gauge time there? Like you said, sometimes when the sun is not even coming up or not going down. What is it like to count the days there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you asked in your last question, which I don't think I got to, it's a whole team of people that get to things as well. So Antarctica operates on New Zealand time, although that's by choice. They could really pick any time zone they want because all the time zones come together at the bottom of the world, or at the top of the world, I suppose, as well. But they operate on New Zealand time just because that's where flights are coming from, either dropping off people or supplies. So it's helpful to be on that same time. In terms of the passage of time, yeah, when the sun is up for 6 months or down for 6 months, I mean, it's kind of a moot point, but obviously we have clocks and like we're kind of tied to when information needs to be passed along, essentially. So obviously all the telescopes and experiments are sending data back to be studied, by whatever university has sponsored the experiment for that time period. So really tied to just like, okay, if I have to have this information to Cambridge at 10 a.m. their time, I have to work with that. So it's kind of just by choice.
That makes sense. What is, what are a couple of skills you would say that in order to be someone who can go down to a place like the South Pole and not just live there successfully, but be part of these teams, like you said, what are a couple of skills that you think are really important that someone would need to have?
Yeah, I mean, as we were emailing back and forth again, I think number one is critical thinking skills, right? I mean, critical thinking comes with so many other benefits, right? And especially for being able to be successful in whatever you're doing in Antarctica, recognizing biases. So taking your assumptions at the door about anything that what normal life is about, essentially, and also how to really get to the root cause of a situation or a problem. In Antarctica, again, all the resources are incredibly finite. So things that are seemingly easy to solve at the beginning can become very complex very quickly. One of the issues that kind of comes up every year again is just making sure something as simple as keeping the silverware and plates sanitary, right? I mean, obviously you're very far from being able to get help. So yeah, the simple solution is just run the dishwasher more often, use extra hot water, but that uses more fuel. Which, do we have the fuel on hand? Yes, but that means that someone has to make an extra trip to go out to the fuel station every week, which puts them in danger of the ice and the dirt. Things kind of spiral very quickly. So getting to the root cause of an issue and creative problem solving through critical thinking, absolutely mandatory. And I would say second most important skill is probably just like conflict mitigation. Again, you are essentially trapped in a place with a certain number of people for an extended period of time. So
yeah,
if you can't find a way to at least work with people that you don't necessarily agree with, you're probably not going to have a good time. So trying to kind of tie those two things together, very important.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I'm imagining parents who are listening to this might be thinking, wow, that sounds like such a cool experience. And that would be so great for my child to perhaps pursue something unusual like that for a year or something. I imagine many people just kind of think, well, some people have an adventurous personality and some kids are not quite adventurous, and a lot of that could be kind of just part of their natural, what they're like. What would you say? Are there things that your parents, for instance, did when you were younger that you might credit for helping to cultivate a sense of adventure in you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people kind of get this sense of like you said, being adventurous is just kind of born into you. But it's not. Obviously, it's definitely a skill or something that you can learn to be comfortable with as you grow. I think a lot of people also have a misconception that it has to be these grand adventures, right? Like, this adventurous person went to Antarctica for a year. Like, there's no middle ground, which is completely untrue. I think for me, especially when I was little, it was really just like baby steps of getting out of your comfort zone, right? So it doesn't have to be a big giant leap. It's just, hey, let's try this one new thing today. Let's go to this new spot. Or even have to be adventurous. You can just try a new activity. You can just start learning about something that you've never thought about before. So it's really small steps of just like encouraging trying new things realistically.
Dan, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. How interesting to hear about life in Antarctica. And thank you for giving us as parents something to think about, the benefits of pushing our kids to take even just small steps outside of their comfort zone and what that can do for them later into their life. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful to see you and talk to you. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, we hope you enjoyed that conversation and perhaps learned a little more about Antarctica than you knew beforehand. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.